Hey, discerning listeners, 90-Day Fiancé, the last resort. Let's see what happens.
We're out of resort. You can't do that here.
Oh. I mean, each to their own, right? They're in private. There's, although maybe you could see over, but because, you don't want to expose yourself to people who don't want to be exposed to. But it's just the two of them, so, what are you going to do? I mean, I guess you could argue that the crew would have to be exposed to it, and, that could be a thing. If someone has trauma around that, if they feel unsafe, you should ask permission. You should alert. By the way, and maybe he did. Maybe he told the camera crew, but, well.
Yes, I can!
What the hell is going on?
Hello?
This ain't a hot tub. This is my bathtub.
Oh my God!
Okay. They're playing it for laughs, but that's a crime. It's literally against the law. Why would you do that? Now, I'm guessing Angela, she's done it to us. I guess they blurred it, right? On the tell-all thing. But no, it's not funny. Now, maybe, let's say 99% of people would either laugh or be fine with it or neutral. But there are definitely people who would consider this to be triggering for them. They might have been assaulted in a similar way, and maybe not in this exact way, but in the way of, I don't care about your feelings and I have this need or desire or something, and I'm just going to forge ahead regardless of how you feel. That general vibe. In fact, for some of you, you might be triggered in situations where you're thinking, why am I being triggered by this? And especially if you've been sexually assaulted and you have that kind of trauma reactivity, there can be some odd situations where the circumstances are very different, but the emotional landscape is exactly the same. For example, I have a friend who was abused as a child sexually, and 30 years later, she's at an art show, and it was the Erotic Art Festival in Seattle, and she's walking around looking at erotic art, and it's not like what maybe some people might think, where it's just this giant orgy or something. It's just a regular art show, and a man walked up to her, maybe even a friend of hers, I'm not sure, I wasn't there, but he was talking to her, and he was a bigger guy, and he wasn't necessarily propositioning her or being aggressive or anything, but just the way he was standing and the fact that there were sexual images around. And I can't remember the exact circumstances, but to her, she would tell me later that she didn't understand why she was being triggered by that, because she was in public, there were people around, but it had enough of the cues. It's sort of like when you smell something and it reminds you of second grade or of someone that you used to know, or a negative experience, and what you're smelling isn't the thing that could have been around at the time, right? Our brains associate things in a way that is particular to our brains. It doesn't necessarily, it's not necessarily logical, if you will. And the way that trauma works and the way that trauma reactivity works is that the mechanisms in the brain are trying to protect the self. What happens is, as the trauma is happening, the brain just says, look, take everything in from this experience and let's avoid all those things, even things that aren't necessarily related to the danger. Like, say you're in a car accident and there's a song on the radio, but the next time you hear that song, you have trauma reactivity because your brain didn't differentiate between the song and the car that crashed into you at 50 miles an hour. Because our brains, it's funny to say this, but our brains aren't very smart. The part of our brains that are helping to protect us from these kinds of traumas. So anyway, this could absolutely, and also It's literally against the law to flash someone who hasn't consented to it. But I don't know. I'm guessing Angela would be. But there's also a possibility that Angela could be traumatized by it, but would make a joke about it because that's what she will typically do. So we might not even know if this is harming her.
Oh my God.
How you doing? Hey, I just wanted to salute you.
Well, since you did that, how about that?
Yeah. Salute. That's maybe one of the worst things he said that would be triggering. Again, I'm pretty clearly Angela, at least on the surface, is enjoying this. She might be like, yes, that happened. That was great. I don't know.
Get on in here, girl.
He gets the Medal of Courage because.
And I also want to counter this as an asterisk to say that there's nothing shameful about the human body. It's not a matter of cover that up. That's disgusting. It's a matter of the triggers for people and what it suggests. That even if so, let's just take what the crime is trying to address typically, which is people who will flash people in public. It'll be a fetish, and often individuals that are doing that are sexually turned on by it. They might be turned on by the taboo nature of it. They might be turned on by bothering people. They might be exposing themselves to younger people that they just want to get under their skin. They want the image of their body to be in that person's head. They might have a fantasy about what might go on in the other person's head. It's pretty sick. And for individuals that do it, even if that's all that they ever did, but they often will do more. They'll often be masturbating underneath their jacket, and then it's often involved. It's not just like flashing. There's usually a lot of stimulation involved for themselves, or rubbing up against someone, or chasing someone. It's in the movies. It's always like flash, and that in itself is horrible. But even if it is just the flash to the victim, the message is, I don't know you, but I am now going to do this to you. I'm going to treat you as a sexual object. I'm going to expose myself for my own sexual gratification, and I don't care how you feel about it, and you're just going to have to live with it, and you can do nothing about it because I'm now halfway down the block running away from you. That is a very powerless feeling. And I don't care how powerful you feel. You could be 6'5", 260, and be good at MMA or something. And when someone does that to you, it's violating. It makes you question your safety in all situations, right? So I'm not saying it's a matter of his body is disgusting. It's not that at all. It's what it communicates and the damage that it does to people.
Come on in here.
Okay, so good. Other people are coming, so he's going to put his shorts back on.
And you know that you like to take over all the conversations. You like to...
No.
No? Do you not get a lot of attention? Because
I get a lot of attention.
the way it comes off, it seems like
you're making
don't.
a negative observation. And if you...
No, I'm not making. I'm asking a question.
No.
Yeah, we don't see much evidence along these lines, but I could imagine that Ed would interrupt, and it does fit with my leading hypothesis, which is a very loose hypothesis based on a reality TV show edit, so I don't really know. But and it's interesting that Kelly brings up attention, because that is the trauma that for individuals who have characterological pathology that leads to them interrupting a lot, it sometimes is generated from a lack of attention growing up. And they're, one, making up for it as an adult and don't realize it, and two, because they weren't interacting emotionally and socially with their caregivers and whoever else in their life that they looked up to, they don't really have the feeling that other people exist. Like an analogy that just popped in my head is you take the bus to work every day, and you wake up in the morning, you get yourself to the bus stop, and you get on the bus, and it's 8 a.m, and you ride the bus with all the other commuters. And you probably have a routine after a while, and you just put in your earbuds or you read your book, and there's a lot of people around, maybe dozens, maybe hundreds eventually on the full route that you're on coming in off the bus. And you're probably not really paying attention to everyone's face or their moods, or and some bus lines you might even be encouraged not to, because if you pay attention, then they'll start to want to talk to you or hit on you or something, try to sell you something. Who knows? It's living in Seattle. Sometimes it's better to just lay low, or any city. Yeah, right. I don't know. It kind of depends. It feels that's not a great way to live in society, but do what you got to do. Point is that you're not. Someone might be even talking, and they might even be talking to you, but you're not paying attention to them because you're in a zone. You're listening to your thing, and there's really no expectation of interacting. Well, that's analogous to the way when you're a child and you're being neglected somehow, left to your own devices, you don't neurologically learn that other people matter and that you know intellectually that they do, but you don't really feel it. So you're on the bus, and of course everyone else on the bus matters, but you don't necessarily feel it because you're not interacting with them, and you have your people that are close to you. You're just temporarily on this bus with all these people. Everyone understands we're just getting from A to B. But for people that don't neurologically have that awareness all the time because they didn't develop it when they were young, then it just doesn't register to them. When they have something to say, they just say it, and they don't have an editor in their brain that says, oh, but if you say it, it might bother other people, or it might look bad in other people's eyes. For people who have this kind of problem, they just live in their own world, and everyone else is kind of their audience in a sense. And so could we imagine that Ed would interrupt a lot? Yeah, and there's been some evidence of that, and he has that characterological style as well of pontificating. Well, the thing is, a lot of people do that, but it also, we can't really imagine Liz saying something like that. Liz has a very different style of interjecting or raising points. It's also mansplaining. It's also, men are socialized to be this way, and I was socialized to be this way. I do this sometimes. I might even be doing it here on these videos, but y'all wouldn't know because you're not in the room with me, because this is what I'm supposed to do. Plus, you can pause or turn off the video if you want to, if I'm being annoying. So it's not completely strange, but anyway, so Kelly is confronting him and he's getting defensive. And I don't know. If I were Kelly, if I were a little birdie on Kelly's shoulder, I'd be, so you're about to say it, and you can certainly say it. What's your goal? If your goal is to be effective, to get him to change, I would wait until a different moment. You can pull him aside, maybe even in therapy, and word it in a way that's diplomatic. He's probably not going to hear it right now. There's other people around. You won't necessarily word it in a diplomatic way. Or is your goal just to kind of blast him, and maybe he deserves it? Then do what you want to do, because then the goal isn't necessarily to get him to change. It's just to put him on alert or something. So I will say, though, that Kelly is being a lot more diplomatic than a lot of other people would be in this situation. And it's not inconceivable that someone in Ed's position would say, like if someone said this to me, I would agree with it. I'd be like, oh, did I? I mean, it'd be mortifying to think that, especially with people I don't really know, if, does anyone, do you ever know that you interrupt a lot? I'd be, oh, crap, really? Ooh, oh. I would just assume that there's got to be some truth to it, because people don't usually say that out of nowhere. At least I would like to think that's what I would do. But he's not doing that because I think of his issue, and this is his way. He has a really hard, and as a part of that characterological defensive structure, it is abhorrent and terrorizing it's a very, very scary situation for them to admit that they've done something wrong, because they're black and white individuals, and if they're not perfect, then they're all bad. And to admit you did something wrong would be to mean you're not perfect, which means you're all bad. And of course, that's very painful, and so they avoid it.
You're not.
There's a difference. See, you cutting me off.
When somebody comes out and makes a blanket statement that I'm like, I take
No,
over
and
every
you just cut
conversation.
me off as I'm talking to
No,
you about
people,
it. This
hold on.
is
You
the
have a
point.
tendency to
This is
always
the
say what you
point.
gotta say, but nobody else can say anything.
And if I were a little birdie, if I was a little birdie on Kelly's shoulder, I would say avoid saying things like always and never. A more diplomatic and maybe more accurate thing to say was, so if I were in Kelly's shoes and I was at my best, which of course I probably wouldn't be in this situation, it would be something like, hey, this is just my opinion, and I'm not saying this to insult you, but and maybe I'm wrong, maybe other people could correct me, but I've observed that I've been annoyed at times when I'm talking or I'm listening to someone else talk and then you interject. You have some great things to say, but it feels like it's more frequent. There are times when I'm like, oh, Ed's here. He's going to chime in with something, and he's not going to let someone else talk. It could be just me. Like I said, you're perfectly free to voice things. I just think you should just give people a little bit longer to finish their sentences or something. It's a more diplomatic thing to say. I'm still thinking, even as I say that out loud, I'm pretty sure Ed would get defensive about it. Yeah, it's interesting to see Ed conflict with someone else, because it's almost like he has this bag of excuses and ammo at the ready to defend himself, and there's not a lot there that he can use to defend himself because he wasn't ready for this. And so his defenses so far, let's kind of watch it, because it could be helpful. If you have someone in your life that's like Ed, it can be helpful to be able to categorize their responses and their smoke screens, because people like Ed can be very good at deflecting and smoke screening and seeming very convincing, especially if it's just you and them, and especially if you don't have this kind of training. So it's sometimes good. So let's rewind this and watch. I remember he said, well, you're being negative. Okay, yeah, I'm being negative because you do that. I don't know how to be positive with feedback to you saying that you interrupt too much.
And you know that you like to take over all the conversations. You like to.
No.
Okay, I forgot about that. The first line of it is no. Yeah, they do that in comedy sketches. You walk up to someone and you just say, hey, your pants are on fire, because their pants are literally on fire. No. No. So they're editing this, I can tell. So it's hard to know exactly the sequence and the gaps. But okay, that's number one. Just no. No explanation. Just deny. Push back.
Do you not get a lot of attention? Because
I get a lot of attention.
And then he will find a way to agree in a way that aggrandizes him of, I get a lot of attention. Well, so that's interesting to kind of break that down, what might have triggered Ed. And I don't know. I don't know Ed. I could be wrong about him. I don't even know. I'm not even saying that. I'm saying I have an hypothesis that I would explore. Whenever I talk about these concepts, I'm always saying, this is an hypothesis that I would explore if someone like Ed were to come into therapy. So I'm not even saying it's Ed. And I'm not even saying it's an hypothesis about who this person is. I'm saying this is an hypothesis I would explore with someone collaboratively, because that's what I do. So that's all I'm saying. But if that hypothesis is somewhere near the mark, Kelly says, did you not get enough attention? And Ed initially is potentially really hit really hard with that, because that is the primary problem. That is the terror that he has on a minute-by-minute basis is, I'm not getting attention and therefore I don't exist. Imagine being 1 year old or 2 years old, and you're just left to your own devices for the most part, and how scary that would be, and how isolating, how rejecting. You leave a 2-year-old alone for 5 minutes, sometimes they will completely fall apart, depending on the situation. And there's various different kinds of 2-year-olds, disposition, but the average kid, when they want to find their caregivers and they can't find them, it's just total fear and terror and longing and wailing and where are they and desperation. So imagine being in that state for years as a young child. There's a lot of fear and a lot of need for a defensive structure around that. So to be accused of, you don't get enough attention, do you? It would illuminate that vast sea of the abyss for that person, and they would want to defend against that. It would also be insulting. It would be bringing them down a notch of, you aren't superior. You are not only like us, but you're lower than us. That's not what Kelly is saying, but that it could be interpreted that way. And then there has to be some way of making up for that distance of being demoted. So I have to say, I get a lot of attention because I am special. I think that's what's happening, but I don't know. What do you think?
The way it comes off, it seems like
you're making a
don't.
negative observation, and if you
No, I'm not making. I'm asking a question.
No, you're not.
There's a difference. See, you cutting me off.
So then he says, you're making a negative observation, and then he was going to continue that. I can't imagine the continuance of that sentence really being convincing to me. But again, another defense of just like, you're bringing up, I'm guessing if I'm reading Ed right, he would say, you're bringing up a negative observation of me, which means that I'm going to try to defend myself or something like that. So that's another way of trying to win this situation, trying to deny that there's any kind of flaw or mistake that he might have made.
When somebody comes out and makes a blanket statement that I'm like, I take
No,
over
and
every
you just cut
conversation.
me off as I'm talking to
No,
you about
People,
it. This
hold on.
is the
You have a
point.
tendency.
So then he says, when someone goes out and says a blanket statement, again, he doesn't finish, but I think he was probably going to say something like, it's natural that I'm going to defend myself because that isn't fair. That doesn't make any sense or something like that. So that's another thing in his bag that I'm guessing Liz has heard before. If you're just going to come at me with these kinds of criticisms, I don't know what to do, even though Liz was bringing up something that was fair.
To
This is
always
the
say what you
point.
gotta say, but nobody else can say anything.
Can I tell you something? He does this front, and I talk to him privately. Listen, I know he fronts like this because he don't know how to show his emotions. That's
Angela did something else. Angela, that was healthy. She was talking to, I don't know, I need to watch the little titles. Kelly's partner. Angela was talking to her and being nice but blunt, and seemingly was helpful to her by saying, look, you reacted in the moment last night in the therapy session, and makes sense, but you can't do that again. You can't just completely reject Kelly like you did last night. And that's not what I would say, obviously, but it was altruistic and seemingly helpful. And here she's doing it again, even way more so of this. You're reacting to, now I wouldn't say to Kelly, you just have to deal with it, because underneath all this facade of this front is a nice person. That doesn't mean that Kelly can't still say what he's saying, So it doesn't negate what I think, and I think that's what Angela's trying to do. But it is very interesting that she's saying something that is spot on and might even help Ed to some extent. And I wonder if it takes one to know one, right? Because what Angela does, I am positive, is a front that is trying to protect a very vulnerable inside. We have seen her cry and appear vulnerable, but even that vulnerability, I think, is more exterior than the real vulnerability down below. Because when she's vulnerable on the show, Angela is typically she's feeling sorry for herself. But I think even below that is a self that believes that she is ridiculous and irrelevant and discountable and like garbage. That's the way she comes across to me, that she's trying to hide, because that's how she treats other people. One of the ways to guess at what is going on the inside of someone is to take note of the pattern of how they make other people feel, because they have that modeled to them. That's how you treat people. That's how I was treated, so I'm going to treat other people. But also because they have this warring object dyad on the inside of I'm garbage. Yes, you're garbage. I'm going to treat you like garbage. Am I garbage? Yes, you're garbage. It just tends to want to become externalized. It's such a presence in their mind that, especially when under stress, that's what will come out of them, and they will project through projective identification, make you feel their feeling by making you feel like garbage, and then they don't feel like garbage anymore. So we could imagine that a lot of people, Michael included, around Angela feeling like garbage. What would it be with, and deep down she feels like garbage. For Ed, I guess, I'm guessing that they would feel lesser. What does Liz feel in conflict with Ed? She probably feels lesser. She feels dismissed. She feels stupid. And it's a good possibility that on the deep inside of Ed, that is not only how he feels, but what he assumes to be absolutely true about who he is and his worth in the world.
Can I tell you something? He does this front, and I talked to him privately. Listen, I know he fronts like this because he don't know how to show his emotions. That's all I'm saying.
I think we need to stop enabling and start working on it.
That's a good thing for Liz to say. Yeah, she's been around this block a number of times. She's like, okay, that's great, Angela, but until he changes it, then it's still a problem. Fine, underneath it all, he's scared, but until he actually tries to change this, then we're all stuck with his bad flaws, and he just thinks it's okay to be that way. And she even used the word enabling, which is, I think, potentially appropriate.
Angela's making some good points that I need to be more responsible for my behavior, and I agree with her. But at the same time, I really don't deserve to be, attacked by Kelly.
So normally I would be encouraged by what Ed is saying here. That I don't think he is really understanding what Kelly is saying. And I remember thinking this a number of times, I think even in therapy when we saw the couples therapy bits. But Ed is saying, Kelly's right, I need to be more responsible for my behavior. But, so I wouldn't be surprised if we had some sort of scanner to detect his thoughts or get him to tell what he believes to be the truth, that he doesn't believe he did anything wrong, at least in this defensive structure. And the issue of taking responsibility is just kind of a phrase he uses, because if we've heard this sort of thing before, especially with Liz, which just breaks my heart, but if he had said something like, Kelly was right, I do interrupt people, that's a much more direct admission, right? And it's not a horrible thing to admit, right? It doesn't make you some sort of monster. Plenty of people do that. Lots of people in my personal life have a pattern of interrupting, and they're wonderful, wonderful people. It just, they're active or impatient, or they want to engage, or they get activated. It just happens, right? So it's not a horrible accusation, and it'd be hard to imagine that this wasn't at least kind of a pattern for him. At the very least, he could say, well, at least two people think that I interrupt a lot, so maybe I do sometimes. But he doesn't say that. He says, Kelly's right, I need to take responsibility for my behavior. And I even wonder if Ed and others are following this cultural movement of the public apologies that will often have that phrase within a apology video that has no apology. So I think maybe there's even a possibility that the public, including Ed, consider that phrase to be meaningless. It doesn't really, I have to take responsibility for my behavior. Anyway, moving on in life. So I have hope, but I had a lot more hope in the past. And when I hear things from Ed, unless I see hard evidence, and I think Liz might even be at that place as well. She, in the last season or 2 seasons ago or whenever that was, she seemingly had gotten to that place of like, okay, it's all words. Until I see it, then I'm not going to believe it. You convince me that it's there. It's never there. You tell me you're sorry, but then you don't really change. So until I see the actual thing of you admitting that you have a fault and that you made a mistake, then I'm just going to assume that you literally never think that you make mistakes and you never will take responsibility for anything. You'll say the phrase, I'm taking responsibility, but you never will actually take responsibility. Okay, well, that does it for that episode. Everyone, please take care of yourself because you deserve it. You really, really do.